Welcome to today's episode where we sit down with John Berry, a dedicated educator and audiologist whose life journey is nothing short of inspiring. From navigating his own struggles with identity and education to making a profound impact in the field of deaf education, John's story is one of resilience and transformation. He opens up about his battles with alcoholism, the turning point of an intervention, and the role of spirituality in his recovery. Through personal growth, forgiveness, and his work with the Hearing and Speech Foundation, John has touched countless lives. Join us as we explore the journey of self-discovery, career development, and the life lessons that continue to shape his path. Let's listen in. Hello, I'm so happy that you're here. I've got a really exciting conversation today with John Berry. And John Berry has lived an incredible life of inspiring others through his actions and his work. And he's one of those people that he has an incredibly big motor, and I'm very envious because he can get more stuff done in a day than I can get done in a week. So, John, welcome to Secret of Happy Life podcast.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
I'm so proud that you're doing this, and this is going to be, I think, really meaningful because I know bits and pieces of your life, and you have been inspirational to a lot of people, including myself, of the things that you've done, the actions. You've been done a great job in business, and you've actually developed a new way of communicating for the profoundly deaf. And that's really just the tidbit of what you've done with your life. So where did it kind of all start, John? Where are you from originally?
I'm originally from Houston, Texas. I was actually born in the hill country outside of Austin, but my dad was in the Army Air Corps, went to Shepherd's Field in New York, and then came back to Houston when I was 2.5. And I was raised there till I was 13, and we moved to Dallas. And then I went off to school and came back to Dallas. Well, I went off to the seminary at 13.5. It's called a minor seminary in the Catholic Church. And I spent 4 years in high school in the seminary, actually 3 different seminaries. And my sophomore year in college in the seminary, I decided to leave. And
all right. So were you being groomed to be a priest at that time?
I was, but the whole process started long before that. I went to school at St. Teresa's Catholic Church in Houston, Texas, all through grade school. But my first year in first grade, I flunked it. And I have a true belief that our life is about seeking our identity. And so my first encounter with identity was I flunked the first grade, and I felt very stupid. And I couldn't read or write very well, and it just obviously was a learning disability. And so I had some low self-esteem of my identity. In the first seminary I went in at age 13.5, after 2 years, they kicked me out because they said I was not smart enough to be a priest. So I left there and I went into a monastery for a year, my junior year in high school. It was one of the greatest years of my life, but I knew I didn't want to be a monk. So I left there and went into a diocesan seminary, St. John's in Little Rock, Arkansas. But to go back to identity, the person that was the strongest identity where I got my identity was my grandfather, and he was a tile setter in Houston, Texas. And when I was 7, 8 years old, I was carrying buckets of water. I was carrying the sand and the cement, and I was making the cement for he had about 15 to 20 people working for him, and I would make the cement. And by the time I was 13, I was putting the tar paper up the metal lath, mudding the walls out, and laying the tile the next day and grouting it out. And I was really good.
So you were a literal bricklayer.
I was laying tile, you could say brick, but I got such good feedback from my grandfather, and he was a person to emulate, and he was just a good man, and it was a place where I felt safe and I felt valued, and I'm the oldest of 11 kids. So by the time I was 13, there were 7 of us.
Wow.
The biggest issue in my life then was to go to my granddad's a lot during the summertime and a lot on weekends, because my mother was a unique, beautiful, brilliant woman, but she was also an alcoholic. And my dad traveled. He left the house every Monday morning, came back Friday night. He was a traveling salesman for several different furniture companies. So a lot of fear was built up in me that something's wrong in life with that we were different. And I think it came from my mother was a very loving woman, and she was even more loving, it looked like, when she was drinking. But as a young boy, it put a lot of stress on me to take care of everybody. That became a people-pleasing part of my life that has followed me all my life.
So you started out in first grade. You had a little bit of you were behind in learning, and it affected your confidence. You worked with your grandfather, and that built your self-esteem back up by being able to do something well. And by this time, you have overcome your the stuff in school where you were starting to comprehend more.
Well, and I was not at the top of my class by any means in the seminary. It was education was always a struggle for me. I remember when I quit the seminary. I learned something about myself, and I learned something about my relationship with my father. I called him and told him I was a sophomore in college in 1963, and I asked him to come and get me. And when he came, we loaded the car up, and I just started crying, and I told him I was so sorry I let him down. And he looked at me and said, "What are you talking about? I never wanted you in this blankety-blank place in the first place. That was your choice."
Where were you going to college?
St. John's in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Yeah. So were you still on the path that you thought you might be a priest?
Oh yeah, that was the seminary. Yeah.
Okay.
And as a young child, I can honestly say this, looking back on my life, I was questioning the belief system I was being taught. And my mother was so involved in the church, and she was the head of the PTA for the Catholic school system and for the Protestant, the public school system. And she was in charge of every organization you could think of. And the priest and activities in the church were in our home and up at church. And I truly, as a young person, had a seeking of what God was. And the things I was being taught, I felt were not true. The whole story I didn't think was true. I believed in God, but it didn't make sense to me, the fundamental way of looking at religion. So being a person seeking, I went in the seminary to see if I could find it. And my sophomore year in college, I called my dad, and when he got there, I was crying after we got the car loaded up, and he just looked at me and put his arms around me. He said, I never wanted you here in the first place. Come on, let's go home. He said, I love you. And he hugged me and kissed me. And that was a shift in my life of not disappointing somebody.
Right. And so at that point, you realized you weren't going to be a priest.
Yes.
Okay. So you come back this after your sophomore year in college, you come back home. I'm sure your mom's pretty disappointed because, everybody, she's got, how many siblings did you say you had?
There were 7 at that time. When I came out of the seminary, there were 10.
So she was just pretty much always pregnant, either with a small baby or she was pregnant the whole time that you were growing up. And so you kind of trying to determine your belief system. You've determined that the road to priestdom wasn't what you wanted it to be. And you come back home, and this is after your sophomore year. So what are you doing then?
It was in 1963, and I was getting drafted, so I went and signed up to join the Navy. The Army drafted me, and I flunked the physical to get into the Army, and thank God. And I didn't know what to do then. It was too late to get it.
What was the reason that you flunked the physical?
I had really bad asthma from 1.5 to 2 years of age.
Okay, so they wouldn't take you in the Army, but they did take you in the Navy?
No, I went to sign up for them, and the Army drafted me during that period.
Oh, okay. So you failed the physical, so you didn't serve at that time.
Right.
Okay.
And I was 20 years old. My next door neighbor was a man by the name of Mike Tolliver, and his mother and siblings lived in Dallas next door to us. And his father was the head of Union Pacific Railroad or whatever in Chicago. And Mike had just won the Rose Bowl in 1964 as a quarterback for Illinois. And he was going up to stay with his dad. And he said, come with me. My dad will get you a job. So I went to Chicago with him January of 64. And he got me a job, all right, working on the docks in Chicago from midnight till 10 in the morning. And you could work 7 days a week if you wanted to.
I bet you got an education there.
Coming right out of the seminary and being put in that position was very freeing, but very fearful.
I can imagine. And so you're working on the docks. You're seeing people in life that are totally different than what you previously. You were in a small bubble when you were in Texas and in Arkansas going to school. And certainly you're outside the bubble now. You're in Chicago working on the docks.
Well, I think one good thing that happened during that period, I came home every summer, and I worked with my grandfather up till I went to the seminary. But when I came home, I worked in construction almost every summer. And so I felt at home with the people I worked with like that. So to be honest with you, I felt more at home with some of the people in Chicago on the docks.
There you go. Because it was more like working with your grandfather's crews.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it was so damn cold up there, there was no way I was going to spend another winter there. So I went back to Texas, and I got back too late to go to college that particular semester. That was September of 64. So I went to work in a meatpacking plant, and I got accepted into St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas, run by the Holy Cross Brothers in January of 65. And there was only 350 students, and I didn't know that when I signed up to go there. And there was 50 PhDs on staff. And these kids were some of the brightest kids from all around the world that came to go to school there. So all I can tell you was it was like jumping from one fire into another because, like I said, education was not my forte. And I had switched my major from philosophy and theology to chemistry and biology. And I was already classified as a senior when I came to St. Ed's because we took 30 hours a semester in the seminary. And so they classified me as a senior. After being there 6 months, the first semester, that summer, I came back to St. Ed's and I was offered a job at the School for the Deaf as a house parent. Well, it was a room and board and about $200 a month, so I thought I was rich.
Yeah.
I loved it. I lived in the dorms with actually 7 and 8 year old kids, 3 cottages, and then they put me in charge of 2 cottages. And then after a couple of years working there, going to school, I became supervisor for all problems from 3:30 in the afternoon to 8 o'clock the next morning, 7 days a week. When I could not get higher than a B in organic chemistry, I was not going to get accepted in state in a medical school. And so I couldn't even imagine going to out of state cost wise. So I had no idea what to do. It was one of the lowest points of no direction.
So by this time, are you ready to graduate with a degree in biology and chemistry?
No, I went to my advisor and I said, how do I get out of school the fastest? And of course, he looked at everything I had and with all the philosophy and theology. He said, you can get a degree in less than a year in English literature. Well, hell, I couldn't read that well. So all I did was get Cliff Notes, and I went to every Shakespeare play at the University of Texas. I had a skill to be able to listen. And that's the only thing that got me through, because I can remember my first course I'll tell you this way. I didn't know what to do, so I started on a master's in deaf education at the University of Texas. Well, I had lived for 3.5 years with deaf children all day and all night, and they were teaching the only way a deaf child could succeed was through lip reading. Well, I'm signing in this class to the deaf people, telling them they shouldn't be there if they couldn't lip read. So I didn't even withdraw. I just quit going there, started writing different universities, and got accepted. Actually, Frank Powell, who was the principal there, helped me make a decision to come to the University of Tennessee to get my master's in deaf education.
I always wondered how you got to Tennessee.
I came here in 1969, the summer of 1969. The year I graduated in 1968 from St. Ed's, a very close priest friend of mine took me and 4 or 5 other guys to Europe for 2.5 months, and all expenses paid. And we lived for a month in Rome. We lived in Venice and Florence for a week each. We went to Switzerland and Germany and Austria and Spain. We didn't go to France because de Gaulle was not happy with the situation with the Vietnam going on.
Phil, that's a long way from Texas.
Yes, it is. Ended up in England, Ireland, and came home. And when I got home, I had been dating a young lady for 3.5 years. I didn't know what to do. And she was my best friend. So I proposed and we got married October the 12th, 1968. And then she came to Tennessee with me. She was a young lady that went to Stevens College and was polished, and her family had money, and I grew up thinking I was poor, but I really wasn't poor. We had everything we needed, but when you've got 7 kids living in a 3-bedroom home,
that's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah. And the situation at home, it created a lot of wanting to get away. Actually, I'm almost sure that one of the reasons I left for the seminary at 13 and a half was, and I carried that guilt for a long time, that I abandoned my brothers and sisters. And that was a struggle. But going back and forth 2 or 3 times a year. It was great coming home, but it was always great to go back to the seminary, and then it was great to go back home. I was always looking forward. I wasn't living in the moment. I was living till I got back home or living till I got back to the seminary.
Right.
And that's not a good pattern. I have learned that's not a good pattern to live by.
So by this time, you get married, you move to Tennessee, you're getting your master's at the University of Tennessee in audiology, or what is it?
No, I was in deaf ed, and they were teaching the only way you could teach deaf kids was through sign language.
Right.
And I knew that wasn't the only way. I lived with kids that their hearing loss had nothing to do with their, it had something to do, but there were some kids deaf that could communicate better than some of the hard of hearing kids.
Right.
I was getting ready to go home and go in the construction business. I had been being trained in the summer to be a foreman for a big construction company in Dallas. And I went into an audiology class, and the requirement was to observe this research project taking place at the University of Tennessee. I saw deaf children on the floor with headsets on, and they had normal voice quality. Well, deaf kids don't have normal voice quality. So I became interested, why would they have normal voice quality? And I asked Dr. Asp, could I volunteer for the next month to see what was happening? And at the end of that, he hired me as a graduate student. I was shifting my major from deaf ed to audiology, but I went ahead and finished the master's in deaf ed and started working in audiology. Went to Zagreb, Croatia. I lived in a little farmhouse in Rocky Hill, and I had underpinned it and built a bedroom on one side and redid both kitchens on both sides. It was an old couple and made enough money at that time to put $400 down on the house, and I remodeled it. And within 9 months, sold it and made enough money to buy a chicken farm in Dixie Lee Junction that had 2 homes. By this time, I'm teaching some classes at UT, working on my master's in audiology. You know, the very first time I went into a class in instrumentation, I remember Dr. Asp saying, today we're going to study the oscilloscope, and on the abscissa you read frequency, on the ordinate you read amplitude. And I was trying to figure out if the oscilloscope started with an O and an A.
I was going to say,
I had no idea. So I just, when class was over, I took and got the machine and started labeling it. And I learned all the equipment, where I ended up setting up most of the master and PhD thesis, their instrumentation for their studies.
So at this point, you're teaching, you're getting your master's, you're just about to get your degree. Meanwhile, you've redone 2 houses, and you've moved to Dixie Lee Junction, and you've got a chicken farm. Do you have a minute in your day at this time, or are you just going 100 miles an hour all the time?
100 miles an hour.
Okay, well, so that's not any different than any time when I've ever seen you. You, like I said, you've got an incredibly big motor. And so from this, you go to Croatia. Do you take your wife to Croatia with you, or are you on your own?
No, we went together the first time in 1971. I told Dr. Asp that I wanted to see the final product of what we were doing, because I didn't know if it really worked or not. I just saw kids with good voice quality and babbling. And so we went to Yugoslavia, and I saw over 300 profoundly deaf kids speaking English with a British accent as their second language. So I knew they were doing something we weren't doing.
This is still something that even today is different and not always widely accepted. Is that
it's
accurate to say?
It's completely contrary to what's taught,
right,
in audiology and deaf ed and speech path.
Okay, and meanwhile, are you continuing? Where are you on your progression of faith or reading, or is there a pause on that right now?
No, I was very much involved with John the 23rd, And that came to a halt in 1978 when my wife decided, actually, we sold the chicken farm because she wanted a house back in town. So we bought a home in Sequoia Hills, and it took me 6 years to remodel it. I took every window out of it, plastered every wall.
The chicken farm is a tough business.
When I sold the house, the two homes on the chicken farm, I made enough money to buy the house in Sequoia Hills, and I probably wasn't making $3,500 a year as a instructor, just an instructor at the University of Tennessee. But I was teaching a couple courses. I started their adult rehab program. I ran the preschool program. And in 1975, I started my own private clinic called Blunt Hearing and Speech in Maryville, Tennessee. I got up early in the morning and I went to UT, and then I went and worked the private clinic at night, and then I came home and remodeled the house.
You're a pretty busy guy. Okay, so you're continuing this process where you're going 1,000,000 miles an hour every single day. You're looking at a wide variety of things. You're married. You've got you're kind of restructuring the way that they teach audiology at UT. Have you become? There's got to be some other teachers at UT that are against what you're believing after you get back from Croatia, right?
Oh, I would be teaching a class to students, and they would say, "Well, that's not what they're teaching."
So you're a rebel at the university level when you're teaching. At some point, did they throw you out of there because you're such a?
No. I was so successful in what I was doing, I became a tenured instructor there. They never had one before.
And did others start to adopt your way of thinking that there's different ways to teach profoundly deaf?
Not at the university.
Okay. But they're still allowing you to teach. They haven't, you're tenured at this point. They can't really shoot you easily.
But it created a tremendous amount of friction. And during this time of my life, I worked all the time. So I did not have what you would call the best marriage in the world.
Well, you weren't really around. Did you have any children at this time?
In 1971, when we were in Yugoslavia, when we got back home in January of 72, we adopted a little boy. We could not have children. And so in 71, my son was born, and we got him in 72. And then 5 years later, we adopted my daughter. And she was 18 months, and my son was 6.5 when my wife decided she didn't want to be married. But during this process, I started drinking, and it was progressively drinking more, but I was one of these guys that I inherited the genes from my mother. The difference was I could drink, and most people couldn't tell it. My wife could, but towards the last couple of years of our marriage, we got divorced in 1978. I was working all the time, and I would have divorced me too.
Yeah, well, you weren't really there. You had 2 children by then. Were you home to see any of their life, or were you just passing through as you go to your next task?
I was there with them in the evenings and remodeling, and I can remember my son bringing something to his mother and said, "Get Daddy to fix this." So I was the fixer,
Right. So you'd structured a life. Your wife said, in 1978, I can't deal with this anymore. And so, was it a quick divorce, easy divorce, or you?
It was not an easy divorce. It was.
Right.
I said, "We're not getting a divorce. You have no grounds." And so we went to a counselor, and the counselor was counseling him. My wife at that time looked at him and said, "I want you to understand something. I want a divorce. I do not love him."
And you were drinking heavily at this time.
No, I was drinking, but that had not, the heavy came a lot longer. It came after.
It came after. Okay. All right. So finally, I guess you agreed to the divorce, and
I moved out, and we had an agreement that when either one of us remarried, we would sell the house and split the equity. And there wasn't a whole lot of money. I mean, I was at UT for 12 years, finished 2 masters, working on a doctorate in speech science, teaching, running a private clinic, and I wasn't making $18,000 a year. I made more money buying and selling houses
Right.
than I did from the university. So there wasn't a whole lot of money at that time. And so,
But you recognize now that you probably, if you were the person that was married to you, you probably wouldn't want to stick around either because you weren't present.
I didn't play that card at that time. I played the card, the poor, pitiful me.
Of course.
Look what she did to me. And that justified me. I got to be a professional drinker then. And, I would get up every day and back in the beginning, run 4 miles every morning before I went to work, even if, no matter what time I came in at night, and I would go to work. I didn't drink during the day, but I drank, I'm embarrassed to say this sometime, but I could drink a fifth of whiskey and run 4 miles in the morning.
So you were the proverbial functional alcoholic at that time.
You got it.
Okay. And how long did that carry on?
From 1980, I quit drinking for a whole year, but I was miserable. And so I was back up to almost the fifth a night within 3 weeks the following year. And I had a cousin who asked me to come help him build a house in Nova Scotia one summer in 1980. So it was 81 when I quit drinking. But I went up to Nova Scotia for 2 weeks, came back home. I knew I couldn't continue working at the university. I had a private clinic that I was feeding it more than I wasn't taking anything out of it. And I just walked in on Monday morning after I got back and I quit. And I had no job, had no income. I can remember sitting in my office late on a Monday night, the same day I quit, and I just started crying. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and I was balancing the books, and I just slammed both my fists down on the desktop and looked up, and I said, "What the hell do you want me to do now?" And the phone rang. This is 11 o'clock at night. And it was Dr. Alexander, Mississippi. And she said, "I heard you talk a couple of weeks ago. Would you come down and set our program up?" She said, "I'll pay you $24,000 a year." And I said, "Dr. Alexander, I can't do that, but I'll come down for $12,000, 2 weeks out of each month, every other week, and I'd work my private clinic." At this time, though, people were calling after I quit from all over the country. I would go to New York League for the Hard of Hearing, and I trained all of them in this new method. I went to Dayton County school system, and we implemented it with all of their school system with the hearing impaired. The Mississippi School for the Deaf, Jessup, Georgia school system, Sedalia, Missouri school system. So I was back in the rat race, but I would come home and I had my kids every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night. And then she and her husband, after a year she got married, would go to travel the United States for 3 months because they were teachers. And so I had the kids full time then. I learned a term one time. At this time, I was kind of kicked out of the Catholic Church. They didn't believe in divorce, so I tried every church in town. My partner was the Church of Christ, so I started going there. And I was teaching their singles group, and it was very successful. But
Pretty dramatic difference between Catholic Church and Church of Christ. That's my experience.
Yeah, actually, on looking at it, you would say that, but when they found out I drank, they had me down in the basement saying, this class I was teaching went from 4 students to 80. They told me I couldn't teach my class.
Because you were drinking.
Because I was drinking, until I went before the church and asked for forgiveness. Well, that flew all over me. So I told him I'd go before the church and explain to him what happened. I had had a car wreck. And it's not worth going into all of that. Actually, a football player at UT ran a red light and hit me, and I was coming back from a reception at the Speech and Hearing Center.
And so at some point, there's a turning point for you. I mean, at some point, you actually stop drinking completely. How far ahead how long did we go where we continued to drink? And I guess there's some denial, in there.
Oh God! And at this time of my life, I left the Church of Christ, of course, but there's very little difference between the Church of Christ and the Catholic Church, except they don't believe in the Pope, but they believe they're their own Pope. But all their other doctrines are very close. But anyhow, I was doing a tremendous amount of traveling, making some good money. I was invited to the Burleson lectures at Rockefeller Center for the New York League to be their guest speaker. And I went up there, and Art Uline from the Today Show was there, and it's a big muckety-muck thing. And, of course, I drank fifth whiskey the night before, and I got up on stage, and he gave my dog and pony show. And at the end of it, everybody's on their feet applauding. And I'm staring at 400 people, and I'm thinking, man, if you only knew who I really was, you wouldn't be here. So I went back the next day in Knoxville. I got up. I moved back into the house when she remarried. I was putting my running shoes on, my walking shoes by this time. And I just started cussing God out. I didn't ask to be born. This is a miserable life, blah, 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 blah. And I fell on my knees and begged God to take away my desire to drink. Well, my kids were out of town for a couple of weeks. It was 4th of July weekend with their mother and her husband. And so I hadn't taken a 4-day weekend off in years. Even if I took the kids every year to Hilton Head or someplace along the beach, and we went to Texas all the time, but the kids were gone. And I went to work that day and worked. Wednesday night, was taking 4 days off. I bought a half a gallon of vodka. And I went home and I sat on my couch, watched Andy Griffith all night, and cried all night, and drank all night. And at 7 o'clock on Thursday morning, July 2nd, I heard all these car doors slamming at 7 o'clock in the morning. And 7 of my best friends came in, and they did an intervention, and I kept telling them, tell me where to go.
What year was this?
1987, July 2nd.
So you had a pretty good run of drinking between 1981 and 1987.
You got it.
Okay. Meanwhile, you're still a functional alcoholic. You're still doing your 4 miles in the morning. You're still working 80 hours a week. I don't know where you had time to drink and sleep at the same time. But so it's 1987. Your friends came in intervention, and where do you go from there?
Well, I went into treatment. 30 days later, when I got out, I tried to run my office from the treatment center, but it didn't work.
Of course you did, yeah.
I got out of treatment, and I remember going to Dr. Worley Fain for counseling, and I walked in one evening, and I just looked at him. I had been studying the 12 steps pretty heavily, and I said, Worley, this stuff ought to be taught at church. And he said, John, what would you call it? And I said, I'd call it How to Be Spiritual Without Being Religious. So the next Monday night when I came in for therapy, he had a parish bulletin from New Providence Presbyterian Church saying Dr. Worley Fain and John Berry will be teaching a course on how to be spiritual without being religious. And this thing went over so big, I started doing it at other churches a year at a time, Presbyterian churches, churches of God. I got exposed. I went to every church in Knoxville searching. And But I got very involved. Actually, 3 months after I got out of treatment, Dr. Boer at Blunt Memorial Treatment Center asked me to start teaching the 12 steps there. And I did that for 33 years. And every Tuesday from 1:30 till 4:30. And during that period, I learned more about myself. I learned more about living. I walked into that class every week nervous, much more nervous than talking before all the people at McGraw-Hill Printing Press Auditorium. And, I can out-talk most people. And,
But in those classes, you had to be authentic. In the other speaking engagement you had, you were putting on a show. There's a difference.
But I'll tell you something that was very important in my life. The method from Yugoslavia gave me not just a purpose in life, but it was so real that it became integrated in my philosophy. So it was a saving factor also. It was something worth putting my life into.
Okay. So 1987, the intervention, you went to treatment. Did you trip up between 87 and 2000?
I've not had a sip of any form of alcohol for 37 years.
So that's fairly rare in the addiction community, isn't
it? I struggled enough the 5 to 10 years to get in the program. I truly believe, and this may sound nuts, but I meant it so strongly when I asked God to take away my desire to drink. I've not had a desire to drink. And this was the first time in my life. And it took 3 years in treatment, 3 years in sobriety before I realized that I didn't do it. That's how arrogant I was. Look what I did. I went to a meeting. I went to treatment. I went to a meeting every day. 3 years after being sober, I realized that God did for me what I couldn't do for myself. And I think that comes from a true surrender. And I believe that surrender and forgiveness are the two ingredients in life that keep you searching. And I think that searching is the most important thing to do in life. You know, there's a scripture quote by Paul in Christ that keeps talking about life is a daily transformation. Well, that word, the way our Bible translates it, is repentance, but that's not what it is in Greek and Hebrew. It's a daily changing of one's consciousness, a daily changing of how you look at something. So one of the things that keeps me going is the search. And don't settle on what you find, just enjoy where you are.
Yeah, I call that living in the moment.
Yes.
And it's not easy to do. It's easy to say. It's not easy to always do because of the fast pace of life and the different problems that happen. But the more that you can focus on living in the moment, because that's what's real, is that moment.
I agree with you, and I don't think it's possible. I think I put it to you this way: we're always looking at the future and planning and structuring our businesses or our vacations or whatever we're doing, but that is not what keeps me separated from the moment. The moment is just to accept where you are right now and enjoy it, but that doesn't mean you can't plan certain things.
Right.
But
right.
Enjoy the moment. The biggest thing in my life in that area is this. If you stay attached to any of those struggles I went through as defining who you are, you'll never grow. You can't get your needs met as a 13-year-old child. You know, I'm 81 now. You couldn't get them met when you were 20 or 25 or 30. Any of the things that your needs weren't met, if you live from that place in your life, that's where you're stuck, in my belief. We have to learn to forgive. We have to learn to realize that this is a journey, and you are being changed, being transformed.
Is there a secret to figuring out how to let go of that baggage? I mean, that's everybody's got a past, and you know, I see a lot of people holding on to their past, and that really defines who they are now because they can't let that go. Did you find a secret? You said it took 3 years, and suddenly you were able to get that off your shoulders?
Well, the 3 years I realized that I wasn't doing it, that I had made a commitment, but that there is a trusting factor of trusting. You know, I ask several different questions on a daily basis. Who do I believe I am? What's the most important thing in my life? And what do I have to do? Well, I think that today, if I told you I was a child of the Creator or a child of God, and that I believe everybody is, I don't know what that means, but I believe it.
Right. And you feel it.
I know it.
Right.
I don't have to prove anything to anybody.
So what was there, I mean, again, to let go of the baggage that you're carrying, you know, was it just a sudden thing that happened with you? Were you able to do it? Or was there something that you mentally had it was an exercise to let go of that baggage?
I think that it's a daily letting go. And I think it comes up whenever I have a knee-jerk reaction to something, it's holding on to preconceived opinions. Why did I have the knee-jerk reaction?
Right.
If I continually ask myself, what is it that's most important here? What am I holding on to? What's stopping me from doing this? It's a belief system that is a preconceived opinion that was created by the situations before, that I can't define my life by those. I have to, I hope this doesn't sound crazy, but, you know, I don't believe Christ, I believe Christ's will was not the same as God the Father's, or else why would he say, not my will, but thy will be done? So that's kind of a mantra, not my will, but thy will be done. Teach me what that is. And so in this journey, you're going to still make decisions. You say, uh-oh, that wasn't part of it. I need to keep changing it. And when I feel at peace and comfortable about what decision I'm making or not making, and sometimes I don't make a decision till I feel it. And that sounds nuts.
No, I mean, I think that's understandable. So in your path, you know, after 1987, you let go of the burden of drinking, or God allowed you to let go of the burden of drinking or wanting to drink. And then, so you carried on, and you had your method that you were teaching for profoundly deaf. You got involved in AA pretty extensively, and you've been, how many people have you spoken to during the years? I mean, you're a teacher, and so you've spoken all over the world about one of those two things. Are there other things that you talk about as well?
I'm still a philosopher and a theologian. I don't think you and I have ever had a conversation that our relationship with our belief system doesn't come up, because it is, you know, what is the purpose of life? And for me today, it comes from the 11th step of AA, which comes from every religion. Seek through prayer and meditation to improve your conscious contact with God as you understand it, praying only for the knowledge of His will for you and the power to carry it out. And for me, that is, people say AA's to learn how to, the goal is quit drinking. I don't believe that. I believe the goal of AA is the 11th step, to seek that will. You can't do that if you're drinking, so you got to get rid of that. But then you also find that you're addicted to many other things that block. And I think we all are addicted to many different things. My identity of being a professor at the university was my identity at one time.
Right.
You could list 50 things that became your identity. My identity now is teach me. I'm connected. Nobody can take that away from me. The only person that can do that is for me. And I don't even know if I could do it now. And it's not religious. It's just knowing that I'm connected. And that connection is the marrow of my existence.
How do you separate religion from spirituality?
I think religion, and I want to clarify one thing here. I am grateful I was raised a Catholic. I'm grateful that that those principles, even though the dogmas and doctrines I don't believe in, they gave the religious background gave me that there's something out there,
A basis of understanding.
right? And religion to me is the lining up of a belief system based on dogmas and doctrines to be a member of a certain place. Spirituality to me is just knowing I'm connected and that God is closer to me than my own heartbeat and my own breath. I believe we're all made in that image and likeness, and I believe we're all connected, and I don't believe religion has anything to do with it. I think that we're just all created and we're on a path, and we all have to find our own way, and I can't define it with a belief system except that I just know I'm connected.
Okay. So at this point in your life, you've retired from your clinic, you've sold it, but you still have a really active role in the charity that you established. Tell me about that.
Well, back about 40 years ago, there was a gentleman in my office. His name was Tut Bradford. He was the head of Maryville Times. And we weren't making any money, but we were serving indigent people. And Tut said, who pays for that? And I said, we do. He said, you go out of business. And I said, well, Tut, we've been doing it for 3 years and we're not out of business yet. He said, but you're not making any money. I said, yeah, but I'm making 3 and 4 times with the university by working 2 weeks outside the clinic. And he said, let's form a foundation. And so we did. And we set it up to be a research foundation to provide hearing aids to indigent people and to provide a training center. So all the places that I set up over a 30-year period training throughout the country became through the foundation. We have fitted over 6,000 individuals with hearing aids that otherwise wouldn't have them. We've put 1,000 aids on kids in Jamaica at 3 schools for the deaf. We've trained people, and it's still in existence. One of my goals right now, and I've got behind me hundreds and hundreds of papers we put together, and we built our own anechoic chamber in the foundation, and we've collected data that proves what the brain uses to perceive speech. And it's almost just the opposite of what's taught in the books. And so I've got a gentleman who works for Apple that comes over here 3 days a week in the afternoons, and we are putting the procedure manual together. We're organizing all the research. We are going to publish all of it. And 2 days a week, I try to go into the clinic and help our audiologists fit indigent people.
And so what's the name of the foundation?
The Hearing and Speech Foundation.
And it's got its own website, and I know that you do fundraising for it. So is it thehearingandspeechfoundation.com, or is there a different website for it?
No, it's the Hearing and Speech Center. It's HS Hearing and Speech Found, the first letters .com.
All right. So what I want to do is I want to gather the information about the foundation, and for anybody that's interested in being involved, we can give them a pathway to find you and realize what you guys are doing there. I mean, and so this is a continual process in your life that you've done this and you've expanded, and this foundation's been in existence for 40 years?
About 42 years now.
And you right now are writing a book on the method of teaching that is, a different pathway for some of those profoundly deaf people.
It's not just for profoundly deaf. We developed a technique for fitting hearing aids, and we had people coming from 15 states who already had their hearing aids. We didn't sell them new aids. We readjusted them for their perception. And these people over the past 40 years have donated over $6 million to, and that's really not a lot of money over that many years, because it's a couple $100,000 a year, and that keeps us running. We are in the process of looking how we can become self-sustaining by going in to competition with other hearing aid dispensers or audiologists, just to be able to fund the foundation.
So are you still walking 4 miles a morning?
No, sir. I had colon cancer in 2015, and I was up to 7 miles a morning at that time. And I couldn't walk a mile for 4 or 5 years. And a couple of years ago, I had a triple bypass, and I'm playing golf again. I'm walking about 1.5 to 2 miles a day. I'm going to cardiac rehab in trying to work in the clinic, and we take our vacations. We just got back from a couple of weeks in England and Scotland, and
oh my gosh, you actually when you were over there, you were strictly vacationing? You didn't do anything other than that?
My wife is a master gardener, and we visited 12 of the big gardens within a 75 miles of London, and then we went up to Scotland, and then we came home, and we're getting ready to go to Siesta Key and Key West for a couple of weeks. And
well, you as much as anybody that I've ever met deserve to be able to take a little time off, and it seems that you're still going at a pretty fast pace. For someone 81 years old, you're burying your competition as far as your work ethic. And so the influence that you've had in your life, does it occur to you, the influence that you've had, the people that you've met, and the literally thousands of speaking engagements that you've had? Does it occur to you the significance that your influence has had?
One of the major parts of my story I have kind of left out, and not by accident, and by accident. In 1993, I sold everything I owned and bought a 50-foot boat and moved on it. My kids were in college, and I started a class with a man by the name of David White. And he's he's become my mentor. And over the years, we have just become good friends. But he taught a class for 12 nights in the fall and 12 nights in the spring for 3 hours every Thursday night. And the course was called Quest for Meaning. And in those classes, he never told us what to believe, but he exposed us to every philosophy, every saint, every sage, every poet, many different ways of looking at meditation, but never telling you which one you had to pick. You just kept exposing us to more and more things. And I'll never forget the night that that I was sitting in. There's 12 of us that stayed together for almost 20 years. And at the beginning of that, we all gave part of our story, and I gave the part of my story where I felt stupid and inadequate. And this David started crying, and he looked at me and he said, "John, you're one of the brightest people I know. Just think about it. You had problems reading and writing. You've got several master's degrees, a doctorate, but you've lectured all over the world." He said, "You just learn differently from other people." It took me another 5 or 6 years to believe that. He keeps telling me how many people I've influenced. I can truly say that all the situations I've been involved in have fed me. I don't look at it. I don't have the feeling that I've gone and done anything. I approached a whole lot of these things with fear or with not knowing what to do. And out of every one of these, I gave a talk last week at Cornerstone, and it scared me to death to go in there. I try to go now every couple of 3 or 4, 6 weeks, and I give an hour and a half talk there. And I can honestly, truly say to you that I get fed when I do that. And so I don't look at it, look what I have done. Look what I've been blessed to be able to be a part of. That's life. I'm just blessed to be alive.
Well, one of the tenets of what I say to myself every day, as far as, seek grace, live in the moment, give hope, lift up others, and allow forgiveness. You're a perfect example of someone who walks and talks that. So your description of you've lifted up others your entire life. And what I always say is it comes back to you tenfold. And the way that you've described it, so you don't think about influencing people because it feeds you and sustains you. That's the coming back to you tenfold that I think about. And so it's, for the regular person, the life that you're living is and have lived is amazing. And you've never made any excuses for anything. You've just pushed forward. And, you're a lifelong learner. And more than that, you're a lifelong teacher, John. And I'm just privileged to have been able to know you, and I'm privileged to be able to talk to you today. There's a lot of people out there that can listen to this, and they're gonna pick up pieces because your energy is it's contagious. And I want to thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an incredible journey for me.
I appreciate that, but the pleasure's just living and knowing you and being a friend of yours is reciprocal, and it's what makes life worth living. And it's just all a part of the progress procession or journey or whatever you want to call it. I'm just glad to be a part of it.
Well, we still got a lot to do. So thank you so much for being with us today, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening. please go to secrettoahappylife.com to comment or nominate a guest that you think has a great story about their pursuit of happiness. Download other episodes wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And remember, grace, hope, and forgiveness. Happiness is a choice.